being in a team is also always a really interesting dynamic because there's so many things that can impact on that. So I think that teams who can talk about it, talk about their strengths, talk about when does it go into shadows, how do we stop it? I worked with a team the other day and we talked about what's going on for us when we're at our best in a work environment, and then what's going on for us when we go into stress. And we then discussed, well, how do we help each other to move from stress to best? How do we move that arrow up? What is it that we can do for you, but also what is it that you need to do for yourself? And it's such an enlightening conversation, and allows the team to really understand how they can support each other's stress levels, mental health, but at the same time also what's the environment we can have that helps us to flourish.
So I wanted to start with there's an article that I read on your website, and I want to quote it to you if that's okay.
Sure.
On this article, and it's a little bit long here, so just bear with me. It goes, too much explicit direction leads to micromanagement and disengagement as people see little reason to innovate or initiate. We lose out as ideas and input from others diminishes due to their belief that it's not the leader's way, then it's not worth raising. Too much empowerment in the wrong context without the right support in place can lead to outcomes and destinations not wanted. Sometimes we want to throw all the shackles off and say, go for it. But having some frameworks, check ins, and feedback along the way can avoid things going off the rails. Now, when I hear that, right, so for me, being a leader of a small team,
Mm.
one of the things that I'm very good at is just letting go and like, oh, you just do whatever you want to do. So when I hire someone, I bring someone on board, I'm just like, just do what you want to do. Like this, let's see what you can do, make the magic happen. And if someone's very good at their job and very competent, I'm always like letting them do whatever they want to do. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And they'll just go on their path. If someone does something and it's not working, I tend to be not micromanaged, but very cautious and very kind of apprehensive and checking on lots of things and putting things in place. Is that management style the right way to do things? Or is that like a wrong way, a wrong approach of taking it based on what I just read out then?
I think that great leadership is all about knowing the impact. So if you've had experience where you have someone that absolutely knows their stuff, and what actually helps them to be their best is to throw those shackles off and you get a great outcome, then that in itself is a test that says you're on the right track with that person. But another person might just work better with having parameters, having some boundaries that they sit in, because maybe that's the way that helps them be their best. So I think leadership is all about working out where you need to sit to enable that person to be their best. Now, if you have a particular style, which you just mentioned, Luke, that you like just letting go and letting people, you know, perturbate and do what they need to do in their own way, you knowing that sometimes you need to flex out of that style is the critical thing, I think. That's why, Ferocious Warmth, I use the infinity symbol, that sometimes we need to pull more from the left, more from the right. The structure stuff is often more strategic, cognitive. Here's the criteria type of stuff. And some people just flourish with a little bit more of that in place. Some people need it because, as you say, they're still not too sure about their skills. They're still learning the environment. They're still learning what are we really after. They're unsure. And so putting that foundation in for me is, I think, the flexibility we need to have as a leader that really understands the people in their team, knows what they need, and then knows when it's time to sort of pull back a bit and let that person fly a little bit more in their own space. So I think it comes back to us as the leader going, what's my job here? It's not for everyone else to just fit and work with the way I like to work. It's actually what's going to make us work together well.
It's almost like, and I understand now why emotional intelligence is so closely linked to leadership all the time, because you need to have that self-awareness and be able to understand, hey, this person thrives a lot when it comes to being free. But I notice when I put like we need to do this by this date and the strategy and those kind of things, they tend to kind of crumble a bit. So that's why emotional intelligence, I imagine, is so important, right?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's that emotional awareness of others. And then that helps you to be able to emotionally manage. So part of the role of us as leaders is to be that architect. I think that creates the environment for people to thrive. And we have to have an awareness of other people and their emotions and their state and their skills and their attributes, to be able to do that. So yep, you've absolutely nailed it.
I think that's where the warmth and the ferocious leadership comes in, right? You have, in some situations, someone's going to be like a, there's the big five personality types, for example, right? Have you heard of the big five before?
Yeah,
You have like someone who's extremely high in neuroticism, right? And everyone knows, as kids come into the world, they have their own personality types, their own personality styles, and no child is the same, no person is the same, because we all have our own strengths and weaknesses and so forth. But someone who's extremely high in neuroticism, they're a very sensitive person, which comes with its own attributes and positives, won't do too well to, for being very harsh with them, like, you did this wrong or this is bad. Whereas someone, I mean, I don't think anyone will do that really well, but like being direct, for example, might work with someone who's like, just give me the answer, come on, let's move forward. But someone else
yeah,
who's like needs a bit of, tenderness, like, hey, like, I feel like maybe this could be done better, XYZ, needs that kind of style. So I love what you said about knowing the impact, because it takes away from, oh, like I need to be this rigid leadership robot, like I need to do A, B, C, and D. It's going to rather that emotional part of like, what's the impact of this to this person here, or to the team dynamic as in general.
absolutely. And look, I have a really strong rider that fits under all the things when I talk to leaders, and that is we should never do harm. And I don't think that uh, often when we're really clear, uh, people really appreciate it. Professor Brene Brown, one of her most famous quotes is clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Uh, but for some of us, we need to understand that our impact, I call it strength into shadows, our clear impact and our clear strength that we may have can, for some people, flip over into being harsh. And the thing we know around the brain now is that when we feel connected, when we feel that we can trust this person not to harm us, our prefrontal cortex jumps into the game a lot more, and we think better, we problem solve better, we collaborate better. And when we have that little bit of driving fear, and I'm not talking about fear that just is about, courage to get up and do something, but that intimidation that leaders can sometimes give to their teams. We've got to understand that that's actually cobbling our ability to be the very best we can. It's not making people work better by being harsh with them. So the empathy piece from emotional intelligence is always critical. I sort of, head and heart, if you think of that infinity symbol, I sort of liken it. I like a gin and tonic. That the context requires. Sometimes we need less gin and more tonic. Sometimes we need more gin and we need less tonic. But we should never ever use and have a gin shot. It should never be pure. Uh, Head straight to the point. There's no brooking for anything else, unless we are in a crisis situation and we have to move with action. But we should always be thinking about, what's the impact of my communication on people. You know?
I love what you said there, and like it reminds me of a situation for me growing up. I was always a very sensitive person, right? Like, and it's very sensitive to people's emotions and the feelings around me, my parents, and all these things. And the skill set of that is you can read people better, you can understand people better, you can tune into emotions better. But the downside is you take things a bit too personally. And when
Yeah,
you were saying that stuff, then I remember a specific scenario as it relates to work. Back in 2016, I was working with this startup business, and I remember I had really good skills when it comes to sales and various things around marketing. But in this role, the leader that I had was a bit of a bully, like, for lack of better words. He was just always, picking on people, like not in like a direct, like, you're an idiot or those kind of ways, but rather like just being too much banter in a way, at least for me. And it made me in my head, like I was really in my head, and not in my body, if that makes sense. And
yeah.
I felt really stifled. I remember speaking, and like when it comes to communication and speaking to other people on the team, and then also speaking to clients, I always felt very stifled. So then I
Mm,
create this identity around like, I'm a socially anxious person, or like I have social anxiety, all these things. But I realized over time, and when I stopped drinking as well, which is a whole other story, that when I worked with other people, certain people, I would be confident, I'd be approachable, I'd be able to articulate my words clearly. And it was always dependent on, the environment of the people that I worked with. And what I needed at that point in time was a leader who was able to, you know, uh, build trust through building rapport, as opposed to building trust through, being cheeky and bantering and those kind of things. And that reminded me deeply of what you said just before.
Yeah. I think that, it always does come down to, do we know ourselves well first? So I love that you've articulated that you really learned about yourself. And, people who are very, have got that emotional intelligence, got that heart strength. So they've really got heart strengths. I love talking to them about what happens when that strength does go to a shadow. So instead of being compassionate and sensitive, we can get easily offended. How do we balance against that? And I encourage people to pull from the other side. So how do we pull from a head strength that allows us to be a little bit more analytical about what's going on, which is, again, what you exhibited there beautifully, about understanding what are the triggers that you have. So I love working with people around, okay, what are the triggers that trigger you out of balance of the head and the heart? And that was one for you. I don't think a lot of people think about those things, of what actually triggers me out of being the centered person that I'd like to be. Just as much on the other side, people with a lot of head strengths, they can go into shadows as well. So clear into harsh, which we've already talked about, but also things like being strategic. You can be too strategic so that people feel that you are totally making decisions on high, and that you're emotionally absent because it's all about the strategy, it's all about the results. So thinking about, I sort of say sometimes our strengths can become our kryptonite. Again, it always comes down to, do I reflect on myself? Being in a team is also always a really interesting dynamic, because there's so many things that can impact on that. So I think that teams who can talk about it, talk about their strengths, talk about when does it go into shadows, how do we stop it? I worked with a team the other day, and we talked about what's going on for us when we're at our best in a work environment, and then what's going on for us when we go into stress. And we then discussed, well, how do we help each other to move from stress to best? How do we move that arrow up? What is it that we can do for you, but also what is it that you need to do for yourself? And it's such an enlightening conversation, and allows the team to really understand how they can support each other's stress levels, mental health, but at the same time also, what's the environment we can have that helps us to flourish.
Hey guys, before we dive deeper into this episode, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Are you over worrying about having to create content? Are you over that nagging feeling telling you that you should be posting today? Or I should have posted yesterday, or I should be more consistent with my content? Well, there's no need to worry anymore, because my business, Personify, we focus on helping leaders to grow an online presence. And we do this through content creation. We have a multi-step process where we do all of the clip selection, the strategizing, the uploading of the content, the copyright of the content, the video editing, the graphic design, the whole lot across all 10 platforms. So if you're a business owner out there, or if you're a leader, or if you're someone who has something to say and you don't have to worry about creating all this content, which by the way can take upwards of 30 hours each week, then let us know. We're here to help. You can reach out to me on the website www.getpersonified.co. GETPERSONIFIED.co. It's also in the link below. Peace. And we all know, right, like when you're in a stress state, like how you interact with the world, how you see the world is completely different. Like I was in a very stressed state yesterday, and even like the 5-10% under the current, what you think is small stress, really affects how you see everything. I remember in the morning, I was seeing things very different to in the afternoon, and it was because I was stressed and I was feeling, how would you say, a little bit jaded about certain things and seeing things differently. So I think it's so important that you create an environment, a team environment at least, that doesn't, that it has a way to either reduce stress or allow things to come back to a mean.
Yep. And I think it's vital work to do. Often it gets left to, do we do it or do we not? Well, we've got other things we've got to do. Yet if we get that right, the things that we've got to do go better. So, again, you identifying that you're in that stress space. Yeah, we flick off quicker. We go into that high mode of high stress quicker. We react in more extreme ways when that goes on. And so again, I talk to people about ferocious warmth is sort of the center of the infinity, where we're pulling from our head and the heart, depending on the context. But if we're stressed, we're going to go to our defaults. We're going to go for where it feels comfortable, which might mean more head or more heart. And at the extremes of those, we can cause real damage to ourselves and others. So I call the extreme of the heart strength, or the relationship side, to be the enmeshed zone. And our relationships become enmeshed. We go into rescuer, we go into drama. Things trigger us a lot easier. We find emotional regulation really hard, so we're trying to do our work in dysregulation. um, and same with it the other side, too much head, too much results driven, we can go into what I call the fearsome zone, where that is where bullying, toxicity, narcissism sits, where people in one inflicts trauma, those inflict trauma. The enmeshed leader can inflict trauma, but they tend to create a lot of drama around them. So how do we actually make sure that we're getting balance of the head and the heart? So I bet the stuff that you did, I'm interested in knowing, actually, what stuff did you do to help regulate yourself back into that center?
Good question. So the first thing that I did was I quit alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big thing for me. Like we all know the effects of alcohol and in self regulation and emotion regulation. I quit alcohol. That was a crutch for me. Often I'll drink a lot in the weekend, and then for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I was in this kind of weird, anxious state, and that kind of triggered it as well. I was meditating a lot, usually about 30 minutes to an hour in the morning.
Mm.
I was also practicing cognitively, um, my thoughts in my mind when they come up, rather than attaching to them. I would watch them kind of go past me. And it's interesting you say the stress thing, right? Because this is relevant. Like when I feel stressed towards others, I can become extremely logical, but towards myself, I'm very emotional. So it's
Aha.
this weird kind of, yeah. So like, and this you've probably seen this thousands of times when it's working with people, but like the individual who's stressed will get caught up on the words. Oh, you said this, did you? You said that, or you do this or that. And when I do that, I can see myself doing that, and then I know straight away, like, and as much as my body, my nervous system wants me to like go go go, I know it's a sign for me to step away and to stop and to like, hey, like this state you're in right now is going to cause chaos. You need to back off, and you need to spend like 5 minutes just like phone away. It could be just like going outside in the veranda and just like staring for a bit and just thinking it through.
Mm.
So those are some things that I've done in the past. But the biggest one, if I'm honest with you, is around alcohol. And maybe it's just a serendipitous moment of like, I quit alcohol, then it happened, but it was huge. I remember quitting, and then I started to go to a sober quote unquote events where I would just like dance and go back into my body. And I remember when I started doing that, it was like these kind of shackles were lifted off me, and I became a more social person. So that was a real catalyst, removing alcohol, if I'm honest with you.
Love it. And
Yeah.
I love also putting with it the movement of dance. Um, there's so much research around the shift of, if you're stuck, get moving. So I love that you put those together. And yeah, what a momentous thing that you've done, giving up something that was obviously part of your social life, part of the way that you worked. It takes great courage to do that, and I think that's such a phenomenal thing and decision you've made for your life, that for you that was important. So I think those long-term decisions that we make are really critical, and also those in the moment ones. So the ones you mentioned about stepping back, um, I encourage people to think about, how do I pull from the other side? So if I know I'm getting emotionally dysregulated, have I got time to sit down and just actually write down some notes, journal for a moment, just sort of get a little bit cognitive with writing something? Um, or, how can I be a bit pragmatic? And, I have a lot of people say that if they know they're quite heart driven, I know that I avoid the tougher conversations, right? So they already label it as tougher conversations. Whereas, my position on conversations where we're giving feedback to each other, we're having conversations around challenging stuff. That's, I think, the richest conversations that can be had. And there's a lot of trust that builds when they're done with positive intent, and And so sometimes what we need to do to not avoid those conversations is pull from our pragmatism, pull from our objectivity, and say, well, how is this offending our, our team, our colleagues, our clients, our whatever they might be, our customers, and get a little bit of objective so that we can come down out of that high state to say, well, actually, what do I actually need to do? um, and bring that together. So I encourage people to go and have a conversation with someone who know they're really good at being really strategic and straight down the line of what do I need to do next when I'm feeling a bit all over the place, or if I've gone really to my head, I'm really disconnected, emotionally aloof from people. Maybe I've really disconnected and I'm not sure, excuse me, what is going on, and I've my emotional intelligence has actually gone a bit down because my self-awareness is become a bit myopic around what I've got to do, what I've got to achieve. How do I just go and sit down and have a cup of coffee with someone and say, tell me what's
Yeah.
going on for you? How are you finding this project that we're on? Or how are you, family? I know you've got a lot of people that listen that, it's about family stuff. How do we sit down and just go, where are you at? How are things going? Because even just family life can get very head driven, get very results driven. We've got to drive here, we've got to do this, we've got to drop this off, we've got to be here. How do we just sit and, as you've discovered over the years of doing this, just be, and just be okay with connecting with no intent, just connecting because we want to be together.
I love that. So what I'm hearing so far is, first and foremost, it's about knowing thyself. The old saying goes, which is a self awareness thing, right? So if I know that, so like a few things I know already is like I know that I'm naturally, quote unquote, depending on and there's a whole bunch of things you can go into, like past traumas and how the threshold for trauma can increase. For the threshold for sensitivity towards traumatic events or stressful events can increase based on one's childhood and things like that.
Yep.
All those things aside, if I acknowledge, hey, I'm a sensitive person, when I'm stressed, I tend to be logical towards people and pull apart their words. And I'm emotional towards myself. That's self awareness. That's the first stage. And correct me if I'm wrong here, that's the first stage. Second stage is then knowing how to pull from the other side. So, can we use some examples, if I'm right with the structure so far, some examples of how one pulls from their side if they're more emotional, and then second, if they're more logical?
Yeah. So So I had a leader a little while ago who we'd worked on this, and we'd worked with their leadership team around this. They had a couple of leaders that were getting quite emotionally dysregulated. So they were getting very heightened around things, and their strengths of caring about others was turning into, so their compassion for others was turning into, weirdly, not weirdly, maybe I see it actually happen quite a lot. Um, then a position of blaming the senior leader for what was going on in a really negative way. And so it was like, I want to rescue these people and you're the persecutor that's doing it to them. So the drama triangle, which I'm sure you're aware of, was really running really rampant. And if people haven't looked at the Karpman drama triangle, it's really worthwhile having a look at, because we can get caught into that. And so they were compassionate, but their strength was turning into being easily offended and then putting someone in the firing line around that. So they would come into her office and they'd be right up high, and she would just say to them, okay, let's just bring this down. What I want you to do, I'm going to give you a bit of time here. I want you to write down just a few dot points about what's going on, how you're feeling, and then what you actually want to say to me. And so what she was doing is getting them to pull from their cognitive side just to settle down a little bit, settle it down. Now they were there. That's probably a bit extreme around that sort of thing. But when people are quite heart driven, they're quite driven by the connection and are people all right? Then sometimes it's as easy as going, okay, what's our purpose here? Asking ourselves some really good strategic head questions. What's our purpose here? What's the outcome we're after? What's my role to play in the outcome? So you can hear those questions are sort of grounding questions. They ground us down. Not That's probably not the right wording, but they bring us back to um, the essence of what our role is. What's our purpose here? I think they're really powerful. Just saying, what's the purpose here? What are we trying to achieve? And it allows us just to settle a bit. So there's one example, just being a bit more strategic, objective in our questions to ourselves and to the group, perhaps if you're working with a group. An example of being, sort of into the head too much can be that we're so focused on checklists. We're so focused on the timeline. We're so focused on this is what we've got to do. This is what we need to do. This is how we've got to do it. This is why we've got to do it by then. And you've got people sitting around the table from you freaking out, going, I've got so much work to do. I look at that list and it just makes me want to hide under the table, take sick leave. I don't know how to do some of these things. Because what's happened for the person going majorly into their head like that is they've forgotten to ask, what do you need? What supports do you need? How can I help you with this? How are we feeling about this? So again, the quality of our questions can be more heart questions to be able to put
Mm.
us into the middle. But sometimes I think that we can do that at our desk. We can be very head driven at our desk, and we've totally forgot to go. How are people going to respond to this? What's the impact on this on people? Let me go and sit with people and find out. Let me ask them some questions. So that's a way we can do it by bringing them into the strategy. But I think sometimes what we can do if we feel disconnected is just go and do the work that we love. Go and connect back to the people doing the work. Go back if you're a leader in listening to this, or you're on a team, go back and talk to the customers that you serve, the clients that you care for, the kids that are in your family, or your parents that are in your family. Go and talk to them at a human level again about what's going on for you. Um, what's brought you joy lately? I was speaking to a colleague in the US this morning, and she said, "What have you got coming up the next 2 weeks that's bringing you a lot of joy?" Look, thinking about it. It was just this beautiful question that got me back totally connected to my heart, um, and allowed me to go, yeah, this is the important stuff.
So I'm hearing that with the logical people, it's about heart-centered questions, like
Yeah.
questions that build warmth, and with the more emotional people, it's about writing things down, like getting moving from here to like let's write this down and see what the emotion is there and how it feels.
Well, and for some people, it's doing. So it's not necessarily writing down, but it's actually doing. All right, let me get off this call and let me go and do 3 things that are going to help me center around it. So it might be doing, it might be writing down, but it's also again those strategic head questions of what's my purpose here, what's the objective, what's the outcome that I'm after, that can help just to recalibrate us back to that center.
Yeah, awesome. Okay.
Mm.
And when it comes to like we went to the dirt there of like how it's all done. By dirt I mean down to the weeds. If we're looking at the green and blue up from above, what does a team need, and like does that change from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 people, and what might be those things be if it does change?
Sorry, what do you mean by that in terms of the size of the team, the impact on that?
Yeah. Yeah, so first and foremost, like let's have example, an age-old one is like you need to have values, and these be values for the team and how it all works, and these be a collective goal and things like that. What might some of those things be when it comes to a team, and do those things that you need change from a team of say 4 to a team of 10, a team of 20, and if so, what changes?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great, big, huge question.
It is.
Yes,
Sorry.
I think your foundational approach of who you are and how you want to be as a team doesn't change depending on the amount of people. The complexity of getting to that outcome is a little bit more of a process, though, because you have got so many people that are in the team. Um, I tend to like working with teams, again, using the head and the heart approach. And I get people to look at what are we trying to achieve for starters? What's our big vision? What is it? What's our purpose here? And articulating, especially who they serve, that's critical. And then I get them to look at what does the evidence tell us about that vision, and what do our beliefs tell us about that vision? So what do we believe about that? That conversation is critical for a team to have, no matter what their size is. What do we believe about our core moral purpose? So, and we should be able to say those in really clear statements. We believe that, and it should. The belief stuff is the hard stuff. And then what does the evidence tell us about that? So what does our customer survey say about that? What are if we're in something where it's a for profit thing? What does our bottom line tell us about that? And then to be able to say what are the outcomes that happen for the people that we serve, whether it's our market, our customers, our internal team, whatever it might be. What are the outcomes that happen when we've achieved our vision? So
Hmm.
those conversations are really important first up, I think, so that people have got people have got a North Star to sort of head to, you know. So I call that the strategy compass that's got the head and the heart, the evidence and the beliefs, and our overarching vision of what we're trying to achieve. Then we move into what are the frameworks that we use, you know, what's our narrative, what's our story. And the thing that always underpins all of that is what would people see in us, in our behaviors that represent the values that we hold. And having that conversation as a team is really important, because then you can come back and say, are we aligned? You know, do we actually are we behaving in a way that people can say that we value this and we value that? And I think that a lot of places make their values because it's something you're supposed to do, and then they never actually ask themselves the hard questions on, are we living these values?
So it's almost like you need to reevaluate those, or rather bring back into center those values, because you see a lot of people, like, you go to most people's websites, like integrity, honesty, like it's the same values over and over again, which again, they might genuinely be yours, but it's like, I think that values naturally change as the nature of business and the world changes in relation to that. And I think that needs to be reassessed.
I agree. And, you know, I love it when, you know, really regularly a team will go back and they'll have their values very visible and they'll say, what have we been doing in the last month that's actually reflected that in action? And they'll input that on their agenda of their meetings, so that rather than meetings just being about what we do, the meeting is also looks at how do we do it. So because values are all about the how.
Yeah, I remember. I don't remember. Sorry, my process when I'm working with a client is I have, with their content they're doing with my businesses, they have the values, but then application, because values are by themselves hollow. But it's like, let's say, for example, a value is honesty. Like, what's the application of that? How does that come about in the stuff you're doing in the workplace, in the content you're creating, and it translates through that, and that influences how we do things. So I think that's a really important note.
Yeah, I really love people making statements under all of them, and then different levels actually looking at them, because how you would expect a leadership team to actually enact the values should have a lot more challenge in it than the person on the floor, you know, but they should absolutely align um, as well. Mm.
I think the temptation for some people is when they hear this, it's like, oh, leadership is all to do with business. It's all to do with like workplace stuff. In your mind, is leadership more than just the workplace? Is it also family? Is it also raising kids? Is it everything in between?
Yeah, look, one of the you know most common comments I get when people do this work is, "Oh, this isn't just work stuff, is it? It's life stuff." And you know, especially the idea of the head and the heart. You know, who are parents will say to me, "Oh, geez, this has really given me some insights around how I'm working with my own family, with my children, and where do I need to recalibrate because I'm a bit out of whack." The other thing for me is that your personal life is always going to impact on your professional life. And the whole leave it at the door is just such old style thinking, which has led us to have a mental health crisis. You know, that how do we actually see people for their wholeness? And, you know, COVID gave us the opportunity to do that. I call it professional intimacy. And I think great cultures, great leaders actually create professional intimacy, which is, I see you for your humanness before your worthiness. And
Yeah,
I know
wow.
you. Now, I don't know you intimately. I'm not. So we take putting those two together often gets people going, oh, really? But intimacy from a professional space is, I see you. I know your strengths. I know what motivates you. We have conversations about those things. I know what your life is like outside, not to any prying side. That depends on our personal trust. But that I know your family, or the names of your family, or I know your situation, and we have this ease of being able to talk about that. So it's not awkward. It's just, but firstly, I bring myself, and you know stuff about me because I've shared that with you in an appropriate professional way.
It's almost like we've gone from back in, I'm just throwing an arbitrary timeline out, but the 70s and 80s and 90s and even early 2000s of like, work and then like leave your stuff at the door, as you mentioned before. It's almost like we're shifting into like realizing that we're all very similar in a lot of ways and that we have our own struggles, but we can still be compassionate and, for, lack of a better word, loving, which I think is an important thing. And it's also about caring about people, like I genuinely want to see my staff happy. Like I'm not there, like for me, in my mind, I'm not just like, I want to hire these people to get my job done and then make money. It's not about that. Like I really genuinely want the people that work for me to feel happy and to feel alive. And that's why we do meditation and things like that in what we do, like, because it's so important to have that. And indirectly, it does drive team morale. It does drive those things and make people better people. But I don't think people can be better people unless they're looked after in all senses. Obviously, personal is personal. I get that, and that's private. But I really believe that it's important to have a team that's looked after.
Absolutely. And the research shows that really clearly. When we have trust, when we have connection, we work better. Our thinking is better. So for those people who are very results oriented, high performance comes from people feeling that psychological safety. No, and we can't do that. The first level of psychological safety is inclusion. And we can't do that if we don't know people. And so it is vitally important. I have a chapter in my book, Ferocious Warmth, is called That Word, dot, 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 love. Because time and time again, when I work and unpack with Ferocious Warmth leaders, what makes them up? What are their attributes? Love comes up. It's a love for the work. It's a love for the people that they serve, whatever they do. It's a love for the people they work with. That's about loving their humanness, loving them even when they're challenging. And it's an agape love, from the four types of love. It's an agape love that says, I love you because you're a fellow that I'm traveling life with. I was looking at some really interesting graphs yesterday and I'm just trying to, it's gone from my head actually where it was from, but I saved it. So it's somewhere around the amount of time we spend with people in our lives. And,
I saw this.
you saw
Yeah.
it. And so it was a downward trend with virtually everyone in our lives. And then the highest level of who we spend with people is with our co-workers. And so, how do we actually create really functional, fulfilling relationships with our co-workers? It is so important that we have compassion for each other, that we have empathy, and that we do create these bonds that actually allow us to do our work better. And the evidence shows that that makes a difference to how well we work. So the head and the heart is satisfied. And yet too often we have these people go, that's the warm and fuzzy stuff. I haven't got time for that. And wonder why the people are burning out, looking for other jobs, don't feel connected, don't feel seen and valued, which are two of our most important core needs and wants in life, is that we actually feel seen and valued.
I hear that. I hear that. How do we, and this is more a question for me, and I think it will relate to people out there as well. How do we do that? How do we create psychological safety and connection and, a relationship between our staffs and people who are working with, management and above and down below when you're working remotely? Is that a possibility? Is there tactics and tools and techniques for that, or is it kind of a lost cause?
No, I think it is. And I think a lot of people did it really well when they were mindful of it. You know, um,
Yeah.
if, for example, when we first got onto cameras, the amount of people that would be talking to people, but the camera would be on the side. So people were looking at their ear. And I send a thing out to my clients saying, hey, get yourself a camera where you can look at people in their eye, and just pay a bit of attention to the hardware that you're doing so that people feel that they're looking at you. And a lot of people actually said to me, wow, that was really interesting, because when we're on a huge, big, if I've got a big team, some people would say I've got a big team. When we're all together having a meeting, there can be 100 people in the room. And I can't connect to the person up the very back because they're miles away and they've situated themselves miles away. But all of a sudden, actually, they can see me eye to eye. And maybe we do have a better chance of actually understanding each other more. Now, that didn't happen everywhere. And I think a lot of people got, in jaded city around having interactions face to face. But we can have meetings, remotely. We can have meetings like this and have really good, deep conversations if we're asking the right questions, if we're listening empathetically. So I think that's one thing, is how do we set ourselves up so people really feel that we're in the room even when we're not. Um, I've done a lot of remote education development workshops with people online. You get people going, and go and talk about that in a breakout room and have it
Yeah.
smaller conversation, making sure that your agendas have time for just conversation where you're directing and facilitating the conversation to get people's input, using the chat box, sending people texts, how you doing, having a quick 5-minute conversation with someone when they're working remotely. How's it going? Let's catch up for a coffee online. There's so many things. Be fascinating. You work with a remote team often. Yet you mindfully set things up for connection. There's so many things that happen. Having good trivia nights, everyone, or trivia times. Everyone gets on to do the trivia. Everyone gets on to have a dance competition. Just weird things like that every now and again to connect with people. Especially the ones that really need that connection. But I found even more people that like to work by themselves, they suffered from people not making the connection to them. So, what sort of stuff did you do? Have you do you do every day?
Well, I think that that's one of my biggest weaknesses at the moment is I've created a team that's more centric around the business as opposed to the people. And I
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that, and I know it's an issue. Some of the things I try to do is how do I explain this? So in our system, we have like different categories of how things are done. So video editing, copywriting, graphics, those kind of things. Rather than the 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 process coming through to me and then me going through and checking those and all those things, I'm trying to make it so the video editors communicating with each other more. Like, we're doing this, you do this task, I do that task. So they're choosing what they want to do, and it's more of a team centric approach as opposed to like a Luke or a business leader or business centric approach. So that's one thing, but I admit that it's something that I need to improve on because I'm noticing that everything's centered around still around me. So I'm trying to figure out how to
Yeah.
make my small remote team of 4 people at the moment, soon to be more because we're growing, less centered around me and more around the individuals in the team and getting them communicating with each other more, because it's so difficult because you're on Slack and you have different channels here and there. The mindset is kind of like, let's just do our thing and then we'll go and leave the day kind of thing. So I'd love any tips and advice on that, and maybe it's relevant for everyone else listening as well.
Yeah, and I think I really reckon it's really important to do two things. One is experiment, give stuff a go. And often you'll try stuff and it'll work for a while and then it'll taper off and you might need to tweak and do things differently. The other thing is tap into the team and get ideas from them, because especially during our online time, I've worked with lots of teams where what we've done is come together and go, what is it that you need as a team to feel that connection, to be able to feel that you're getting tapped into, that you feel like you're seeing each other, and people come up with great ideas. So I've had teams that have gone, okay, let's without ever putting stuff over the top of it unless it's a crisis emergency, make a time 2 times a week where we get together for, might be a quick huddle, online huddle, 15 to 20 minutes, where we tap into who needs some help, what is it we're working on, how have we communicated this week, what is it that's coming up. And rather than a formal meeting, it's just a conversation of the team. And we ask questions like, who needs help?
Mm.
Who feels like something's getting out of their reach? What help do you need from anyone else in the team? And I think we need to really encourage people to get better at doing that, because usually people sit and go, I've got to nut this out by myself. How do I do it? And I do think sometimes it can be, let's compulsorily put that in the diary that everyone turns up to this time, and we and some people like to have the more head side. I want you to give us a score out of 5 as to how you reckon you're traveling at the moment with the work you're doing. And so you give people a scale so they can think analytically about it and go, I reckon I'm a 3, or I reckon I'm a 4. And then you say, okay, what do you need from us? Tell us about what's going on, why you're putting yourself there. And we create this environment where we're actually here to serve and help people, not each other, not judge each other. And that's important around psychological safety, is when people say, yeah, I'm not traveling all that well on that. Or they can say it's developing. I know it's on its way. I love, when people in a room, getting people to stand on a continuum of, say around their culture, we might be doing things around culture. And I have 6 levels of a culture ladder. Where do you think you are? If you think you're up at committed collaboration, stand here. If you think you're at, confusion and controversy, put yourself here. If you think your team's actually sitting at corrosion at the moment, pop yourself here. And then without judgment, we talk about, okay, where do you think you're at? Why is it that you're at there? And then I might get people at the higher end to talk to the people that are maybe struggling a little bit more with stuff, with what happened for you? And they might be able to tell the story of being there and how hard it was, and have that empathy for that person that's there, and then talk about something that they tried that might have helped them get out of the hole that that person was in. So
Wow.
I think the high quality teams actually talk like this, so that the person that knows that they're in struggle street at the moment knows that their team's got them. We've got you. How can I help?
Mm.
I've got a bit of time next Friday. How about we get together and we have a look at what you're up to and where the plan is, and how I might be able to give you some ideas or help you with helping it to move along. And we start seeing each other sideways as being real colleagues, not just people who work in the same work group together.
I think that's the key as well. I think even beyond that, you have to realize how valuable and how important investing in leadership is, because I think that the technicians out there, or the people who are more head based, will think to themselves, oh, we need to get this done. There's all these things to do, not realizing that the business can't run without people. And in that, it can't run with people at all. Like so it needs to be like the thought before that, in my opinion, is to be like, leadership is important. How much time am I going to invest in this, and how am I going to use that time most effectively? And that's a realization I've just had now. It's like, I need to invest more time in my people and in my staff, and in not just like, well, this doesn't work and then kind of leaving it. It's like, how can this work, and why isn't it working, and what approach do we need to take differently to make it work? And I think that's a huge differentiator between no leadership to leadership.
Absolutely. And it's doing things like getting the team to share what identify the strengths that we all bring. And a lot of people will say, I don't know the strengths of the people in our team. And then when you ask people to bring them, they don't want to talk about their strengths, because that's, we don't do that. We don't do that. Actually, how do we do that? So I have strength cards that I get teams to identify. Okay, pull out 6 to 8 of your strengths, ones that are your strengths. You can do the VIA, or via strengths tool online, and it's a free online thing. You can get a paid for one as well, but what it does is people go through the quiz and it gives you your top 5 strengths. Now you could get your team to do that before, and then everyone brings it along and everyone shares. And there's a great amount of things you can do with strengths, but it can be really nice for people to say, um, where have you seen that in that person, and where is it? Or people sharing, I want you to bring those strengths along. Share, oh, excuse me.
You're right.
Problem with my throat right now. Where is it? Bring along a story of where you really have pulled from some of those strengths recently. And we just start to get people a little bit more comfortable with talking about themselves, talking about their strengths, but also talking about each other's strengths as well.
That's a huge awareness thing, right? Like, you need to know how to meet someone where they're at with their comfort and build them up to there. Because sometimes, and this is a cultural thing as well, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, your cultural intelligence. Like, some cultures naturally are not going to be very open to, sharing their things publicly. So on a scale of 0 to 10, they're probably at like a 0.5 on like, I feel comfortable. So it's like meeting people where they're at. Like, what's the feeling, the vibe, the energy, whatever you want to call it, of the room, of the team at the moment, and where am I starting at? Maybe if it's, and again, this is a cultural thing, in my opinion, like dealing with Americans in business is like, everyone's open, everyone's like, yep, this is me, boom, 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 generally speaking. And the issue there is that the person who's shy or sensitive gets left behind. So you need to find out what that is. But then with other, Southeastern Asian countries, or, this is just my opinion, this is not a fact. Generally speaking, my experience has been that they're very shy and very like, when it comes to team meetings, it's all about just the person talking. So then it's a different level of starting at, right? So it's like, what's the comfort level, and where do we start from there?
Yep. And how do you get people not necessarily speaking about it, but writing it down? That sort of stuff. So yeah, absolutely. And what that does is when you do that, you're really thinking about building the psychological safety. A great book to read for people, you may have read it, Luke, but a great book is called The Culture Map. And that is a really interesting one around cultural intelligence and very evidence based. So it's really useful to be able to learn more about the different dimensions, cultural dimensions, and where different cultures sit on things, and how different cultures can look at another culture and see that it's way above them in the culture dimension, but other cultures might be quite close but still see that they're, more open, or they just share so much, and they're too over the top and all that sort of thing. And that the different cultures tend to sit along a continuum, so knowing some of those is really useful.
That's part of the reason why I'm here in the Philippines at the moment, to learn about the culture and how people connect and communicate. And there's also a language thing as well. Like, if it's someone's second language, how confident do they feel? They might be like 10 out of 10 confident in their native language, but then in English or, another language, they might be like, 0.5. And it's like, okay, so then how do we move past that and say, hey, it's okay, like, to not speak perfect English. You can just mess up if you want to, as long as it comes out. So
Yeah,
there's
and
a huge things there.
it's knowing too, isn't it? I can remember, I spent the first part of my career in the education system, and I worked in a really multicultural school. It was a fantastic school, and I can remember one of the parents, we had very limited English vocabulary when they spoke, and we wrote a reasonably basic letter back, assuming that their vocab was quite limited. And they were beautiful because they did not take offense at that. They came up and actually let us know through writing that actually they could read and write English very, very comprehensively, but it was their articulation that they were still learning, and they were quite shy about that because they had so much that they could put down on paper, but they couldn't speak as well. Now, obviously, they learned, and they really, that was where their skill base was. They were just building that skill. But for us, we'd made a huge assumption,
Mm.
and it was probably the right assumption to make, because you don't want to send something home written that people look at and say, I can't make head or tail of that. So it was also about the relationship that we had built as a school to our parents, that they felt confident enough and to come and actually have that conversation with us, or let us know, and not take offense, so that we could continue to understand each other more. And for me, that's what it really is. Yesterday I was doing a women in leadership program in the health area, and it was just brilliant women on the call, and one was talking about that sometimes her accent gets accused of her that she's being harsh, when in actual fact she's just got clarity, and people who know her well say, no, it's not your accent, well, it is your accent, because you actually are not being harsh at all, you're being just very clear. And so how do we actually get people understand, having that cultural sensitivity, to not take accents as then labeling people around how they are, but understanding more. And we were talking about the fact that it's actually quite challenging to have those conversations as a team if you haven't built up that safety to have that honesty without being offended, but with people asking questions to because they're curious and they don't really know.
And it's something I learned from that, just my own experience, for everyone listening and who wants to know. It's when you're communicating something, it's not about like you did this or you did that. It's like, I feel XYZ, and my experience, like always, like going back to the individual, my experience was this. How do you feel about that? I think it's called crucial conversation state. You share your story, you share the facts, tell your story, ask tentatively, like, what do you think about that? And I forget the rest, but that's always stuck with me. It's like building the safety there and always reaffirming, like, hey, my intention here is to like build trust and rapport with you. I don't want to make you feel like you're doing a crappy job or whatever it might be. And that really stood out for me. And the feeling I'm getting from what you're saying, which is a feeling I want to leave people with, it's like there is empowerment in having a different approach. Like there is a way, any problem with leadership or anything in business in general, but I think specifically in leadership, just because something doesn't work, quote unquote, and the outcome is, say, for example, to build more trust, more rapport with the team, just because one approach didn't work doesn't mean it doesn't work at all. And the feeling you should have is empowerment. And when I'm speaking to you now, like it's like every path I go towards a problem, the solution should always be like, well, what can we try differently? how, do we want this outcome enough to try something differently? And if not, why are we investing in leadership? And I feel like that's a really important takeaway for people. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and anything you'd like to leave behind.
Yeah, you've absolutely articulated such an important, and I think one of the most foundational leadership skills, and that is the ability to be able to have a continuous feedback loop. And it's again, it's like an infinity symbol, because the feedback loop not only is from your context and the people outside you, but it's also a feedback loop from you internally as well. So it's this constant loop that gives us greater insight into our impact on ourselves and other people. And so it comes down to behavioral flexibility. It says, okay, is that getting where we're wanting to go? No. What are we tweaking? And it can be a little tweak, it can be a tiny tweak, or it can be a pretty major adjustment that needs to happen. But always keeping your eye out. And what you were talking about around with the crucial conversations, never assuming that we're right. So being able to say, I love giving people the framework of the ladder of inference that says we get a little bit of data, but what we do to that data, that information packet that we've got, we distort it through our own biases. We go through all these layers of distortion that takes the original data and makes it a story that we've given that data. There's a great saying by Korzybski, the map is not the territory. And the map is not the territory, is we make maps as soon as we see something, hear something, and then we distort it to whatever's going on in our heads. And so to be able to say to someone, this is what I've noticed, this is what I've seen, this is what happened from my perspective, and this is what I inferred from it. Tell me more about how you saw it, which is basically what you were saying in essence. This is what I saw, I felt, I thought. Tell me more from yours. You're asking them to bring their map of the world to yours so you can make a combined one. So
that's beautiful. Last question. Who do you work with, and where can those people that you work with find you?
I work across all sectors. So I tend to, when I look at who do I work with most of my work is in educational leaders, so leaders of education settings and teams within there, and teams and leaders in health. But I also work, there's definitely a pull for me around people that are doing the great work around building our next generation and also caring for our community. But I also work across government, I work across corporate, because all of these frameworks always go across all of them. So, but they're sort of my niche sort of areas that I work in. But then I have outliers where they go, we need this stuff. We need these learning cultures in our teams, and we need great ferocious warmth, head and heart leadership. And the way people can find me, LinkedIn's probably a really good start. Tracey Ezard in LinkedIn. I'm the only one on there, but also Tracey at tracyezard.com is my email. My website's tracyezard.com. So I'm reasonably easy to find. And yeah, really would love to connect with any of your listeners in any way that they'd like to connect and talk to me further. So thanks for that opportunity to say that, Luke. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracey. I appreciate it.
No worries.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Getting Mental podcast. If you like this episode, then you'll love this one here and this one here. Check them out.